building small utilities to save you or others time is a great way to not only make your life better, but also provide a way to demonstrate your skills to others, including employers. I've been creating small utilities to streamline my own tasks for years. In this video, we're going to rebuild a utility that I've been using for years. It displays full screen borderless images. In fact, you're looking at the working tool right now. It utilizes a right-click menu, keyboard shortcuts, and more. So let's build this application. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning software development easier. If you want more free training content, make sure you subscribe to this channel. If you want an even deeper, more structured training, then check out IamTimCorey.com, where you'll find a number of courses there to help you out. Finally, if you want the source code from today's video, there's a link in the description to access it. Now, normally at this point in the video, I will minimize this image right here. In fact, you can see my mouse cursor. But we're not going to do that today. Instead, I'm going to double click. And you notice it shrinks down the image. In fact, behind here is my desktop. This is the utility we're going to build. Notice that I can grab the corners and resize it however I want. And it just puts white on both sides. I didn't really care about the border because all the images I was going to be using were going to be the full screen width and height. Therefore, it's going to fit perfectly with no border. So the impetus behind this application is this. I wanted something like this where I could show you an image or multiple images without having the border, without having all of the stuff that goes around an image. So if we were to close this out, let's just exit this. I have a set of samples here. And let's just pretend for a minute that I wanted to make one of these sample images a full screen image. So let's grab the image. It was over here. Notice all the stuff around it, right? So how do I do this? Well, I can maximize it, but you still have all the stuff. But there is this full screen button. Cool. So now you can see the full screen image. And if I move to the right or to the left, my arrow, well, the right, I can go to the next picture. If I move left, I go to the previous one. But if we move left again, it doesn't do anything because it's at the beginning of the list of images. And if I want to get out of this, I can't double click. That actually zooms. I can't minimize using the system tray icon and clicking on it and clicking on it again or something like that. That doesn't work. I have to hit escape and then I have to hit close. And that's not an ideal experience, especially not when we're talking about just a title card at the beginning of a video. I want to go away without any fanfare. So I built the simple image viewer. Now, what I did, and I'll show you how to do this potentially in a 10-minute training video later, is I created an option on my right-click menu where it says simple image viewer. So, and I didn't put icons on this. I didn't worry about that. I just wanted to have it on my list. So simple image viewer, notice it just opened up that image. Why? Because I right-clicked in this folder. So now I can double-click on this and it opens the full screen. If I move right, it goes to the next image. If I move left, it goes to the previous image. If I move left again, it goes to the image at the beginning. And so on. I can keep going back and forward on these images. So this is the simple image viewer. And if I hit escape right here, it brings it down to regular screen. If I hit escape again, it goes away. So it's a very not in your face type of application. Now, I could open up, let's say I open up here and I say simple image viewer, and I don't have any images on this desktop. Not a problem. It opens up to a white screen. I can right click and say load directory, and then we can come down here and look at, actually it's on my desktop, isn't it? On my desktop, sample pictures, just select one, and it opens up that directory full of images, and I can cycle through those. So this is the simple image viewer. Like I said, the reason I use it is I will maximize to full screen. And actually, this image isn't quite 16 by 9. Those are. Notice the slight border or not border. But I'll take an image like this. I'll have it open. And notice that my mouse cursor moved off the screen. I don't put my mouse cursor on the screen when I am showing you the beginning of a video. Instead, what happens is the image just goes away. Well, how did that happen? Well, I just clicked on the icon in my system tray and it minimized it automatically like it's supposed to do. The normal image viewer doesn't do that. So this is a very lightweight, very easy to use, customized just for my experience tool. Now, how many people need this exact tool? Probably not many. Now, my requirements are a little different than most people. That's okay. That's what custom software is for. It's for you to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to build something that works just for me and my set of circumstances. You don't have to make it work for everybody's set of circumstances, just your own. So that's what I did. I built something that's just for me. I'm going to show you how to build the same thing, not because necessarily you'll want to use this exact tool, but you may go look at that and say, you know what? That's almost perfect, but I want these other features, or I want to do something else instead, like this, that, or the other thing. You can do that. So let's go ahead and see how to make this simple image viewer. And to start with, we're going to open up Visual Studio 2026, and we're going to create a WPF application. So when it comes to graphics especially, WPF is the way to go. It handles graphics a whole lot better than WinForms does because it can tap into the GPU if necessary. WinForms, I believe there's a way to start doing that now, but it's not built in native. Okay, let's call this the simple image viewer, and we'll call it a simple image viewer app. Okay, we'll put it in demos and .NET 10. Now, when I created this app, I believe I created it with .NET Framework. I've updated it a few times since then, but currently it actually is .NET 10. I just upgraded it, although I don't think I've installed it on my computer yet as .NET 10. I believe it's still .NET 8 on my computer. It works great. And quite frankly, I don't have any performance issues or other things I have to worry about. So that's not really a problem. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start working through this. There's a number of things we're going to kind of play around with. So we're going to have to kind of come back and forth to different things. But I want to set the window style equal to none. And that's going to take the border off. Notice there's no border anymore. That's important. If we run this application now, well, it's kind of hard to mess around with now because I can't move it. So there we go. But there's not really a good way to like click and drag it. I can expand and contract it, using the edges, but there's not a bar here to click and drag. We're going to address that because in the actual application, I want to be able to move it around. I use the window key plus shift plus the left and right arrow to move it between screens. But that's not ideal. So we're going to fix that. But that's one of the things we're going to do is window style none. Now, what I would recommend probably is let's take that off for now because the fact that then it gives us that window style. That way we can grab that top bar, drag it around where we need to for now during the demo phase. And then one of the last things we'll do is then take it back off. That way we already have the controls in place to move it around as necessary. So that's the first thing I want to kind of point out. Now let's set up our grid, which in your grid area, you want to have one control that you then figure out how to lay this thing out, or you want to have, actually your grid is the one control, but you want to have like your rows, your columns, and all the rest normally, but not here. We're going to put one control. Image. Name. And we're going to call this screen image. And you have now designed the entirety of what is going to be displayed on this WPF application. That's it. It's screen image. Now, we'll add more to this XAML eventually with right-click menus, context menus, and modifying some of the window actual XAML. But that's it for the actual controls. So let's go to the code behind. This is one of the areas. Let's remove those usings. So this is one of those areas where we could make this into a really, lined up app with a class library where they have, layers and all the rest. We don't need to. And this is an important lesson for you to learn that not every application needs to follow all the rules. So we're going to build an application that only has a code behind. And normally that's a bad thing. Normally that means that you're putting too much logic in your UI, but in this case, it means that we're not making things complex when they don't need to be. So let's change to a file scope namespace. We'll get rid of our code comments here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build up a method. We're going to say private void, and let's say load images. Okay. So, and this is going to take in directory info, which comes from the system.io namespace. So we add the using directory for that. So we're going to take in, we'll call this just dir. Okay. So we're going to say is we also need to, before we do, we have to have some class-wide variables. The first one is a string array that is image types. And in here, this is the new syntax, just say equals in square brackets and go to town. And this is going to be all the types we support for image files. So .jpg and .png and sure, why not, bitmaps and GIFs. And yes, they're GIFs, not GIFs. Okay, string array image files. And this is a nullable array because we don't load it immediately. And then int current image equals 0. And this will be the starting point for, we're going to count how many images are in the file, and we're going to say, okay, we're on image 2, and that means the second one in the list. Or in this case, 0 means the first one in the list, which means 2 would actually be the third one in the list. But, base 0. So now we have that. Let's go back down to our load images. We're going to say image files. That's this array right here. Equals, and we'll put in parentheses, from files in directory.get files, where image types contains, and we're going to say files.extension.toLower, like so, and then select files.fullname.toArray. Okay, so we're using link here. We're going to get the files, which gets all the files in the current directory. Not subdirectories, just the current directory. It's going to get all the files, but then we're going to limit that using, again, link, this query syntax, where the image type contains and the extension. So it's saying, hey, is that file, does it have an extension that matches one of our extensions? And if it does, cool, that gets included. If it doesn't, ignore it. And then finally, grab just the full name of each file that matched having extension of whatever. So they have the full name for each of those files. So that's including the path. What that means is we now have the exact location of every image that we want to load into our image viewer. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to say current image equals image files dot length. Now, this is a bit of a, I don't want to say a hack, because it's a smart way of doing things, but it's also something you have to think through when you're doing it. Okay. I set the current image to the last image in line. It was set to 0. I set it to the last image. Why the last image? Well, because I want to load the images, but I don't want to have a separate method that's like load this first image. Instead, what I want to do is I want to have a method called move next image, like so. Okay, so I don't want to have a method that's like open current image, something like that. I want to have just a move next image or a move previous image. But before you build that method, what do you think move next would do? because the current image is the last one in line. So move next would move to the next one in line, which it's already at the end. But one of our requirements, one of our desires is that this thing wraps around to the beginning again. So if we're at the end, we move next, it should go to the first one in line, which is image 0. That's what we want to happen. So we're going to create a private void move next image. Notice it doesn't have to have an input here. There's no need to pass a parameter because we have the current image. So if image files, if it's not null, .length is greater than 0. So as long as we have items in the array, and the array is not null. So if it's only one item, then you can't move. And that's the thing. If we have 0 items, like we haven't loaded an array, well, that's going to be that question mark here is going to eject us right away. But what if we load an image list where there's only one image in the folder? Well, then the length is going to be 0. So our length will be 1, actually. So that's going to be just fine. So this makes sure we have at least one thing loaded. It's going to make sure that we don't have an issue where we're not loading any images. Okay, so, and remember when I showed the desktop and I just right-clicked on the desktop and said, show simple image viewer, and there was just a blank white screen, that was one of those cases where I loaded the images and none were there in the array. So we loaded it and now the array is just empty. So an empty array is not the same thing as a null array. Therefore, this check does both. Okay, so as long as we have images in our array, if current image is greater than or equal to image files dot length minus 1. So if current image, which remember is at the length, so if it's greater than or equal to the length minus 1, why is that? Well, because if it's at length, or if it's beyond the length, then we have to start over at the beginning. And if that's the case, then we're going to say current image equals 0. This is where sometimes it helps to draw this out on a piece of paper. Map out exactly what the different states would be. So current image plus equal to 1, or I could say plus plus. So let's look at this again, where we're going to increase the current image count by 1 as long as we're 1 away from the max length or less. Because if we're 1 away from the max length, the next plus 1 is going to make it the length, which is the last image. Totally fine. But if we're at the length, then that's a problem. We are going to loop around to 0 instead. So now with that, we can actually draw our new image. And to do that, we're going to say screen image dot source equals. We're going to say new bitmap image. And in here, we're going to say new URI. And that's going to be our image files at the current image. And then we're going to say the URI kind, URI kind dot absolute. Let's unpin this so you can see the whole thing. So this is going to load our image. And it's going to put that next image on the screen. So when we load the images, and then we move to the next item, which happens immediately, it's going to load, well, if we're calling it originally, it's going to load the first item in the array. And if we're calling this move next image again, it will load the next image in the array. But either way, it's going to create a new image that it's going to put into our screen image.source. So that's how we load images onto the screen. Now, if we have a move next image, what do you think we also have for another method? Well, let's copy and paste this because it's going to be move previous image. Move previous image. And with previous image, then we're going to check to see if, there we go, the current image is less than 1. Because if we're at 0, you can't move to the previous image, in which case you're going to want to say image files dot length -1. Remember, we can't do the length because length is the total count. So if there was 3 images in the file, it would say 3, but the positions are 0, 1, and 2. Therefore, we want to say 2, not 3. So that's where we get the -1. Otherwise, we're going to say minus equals 1. And then this line right here is the same as it is up here. Now you may be saying, okay, Tim, that I see a repetition. We need to have a new method for this because we have to extract this out and make sure that we're not repeating ourselves. I thought about that. And I don't see the point. Because if we were to extract this, what would we be extracting? 1 line of code. Now, yes, we could extract that 1 line of code and have a simpler line of code, but that's all we're really doing. And we're repeating it twice. So I don't see that as necessarily the way to go here. Now, if I were up here, instead of saying move next image, I could take these 2 lines out and say display current image or something like that, where it just calls this because by default, the current image is 0, or we could set the current image to 0. We could do that, but I don't think that that's going to add any value. And I do have another problem where I want to avoid potentially having a developer create a bug. And that is if I created a method that was just display image and just took whatever the current image is and display it, then people might call that directly, bypassing the move next and move previous. And that could be problematic in other areas or for other reasons. So instead, I just want to move next and move previous. And I have 1 line that's repeated. But you always have repetition of 1 line. Like 1 line repetition is not something new because that's how we call methods. Like this is repetition. Wherever I call this, I'm repeating the same line. So we don't extract 1 lines necessarily for repetition purposes. Now, again, this is a bit of logic here where we're saying, here's how to create a new bitmap image. If we wanted to look into, hey, is this causing any kind of memory leaks? I don't believe it is. But if it was, then we have to do a little bit of work on it. Well, then, yeah, I'd probably extract it out into a separate method. I'd mark it as private. And I might even say like, hey, don't call me or something like that directly. Only call through move previous, moves next, something like that. But for now, I think that works as is. It's something to think through. With your repetition, are you really saving anything by extracting a method? In this case, I'd be adding multiple lines of text, another method that shouldn't be called but could be called, and all that to have the same number of lines in my current methods. So that's where I lean into it and go, no, I don't think I want to do that. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to think through, well, how do we get the data for the load images? When do we call this? Because we need to know, what the directory is. We need to know when to call this. So there's a couple ways of doing this. And the first way is when you open this up from the launch of the application and you pass in, you say, this is the directory I'm in. To do that, we're going to say in our constructor, string array, args equals environment.get command line args. So we're asking for the command line arguments that were used to launch this application. We're going to say if args.length is greater than 1. So if there is arguments in here, then we're going to, let's call this method load from start. We'll call this method load from start. Okay. So now what we'll do is let's build out a load from start method. So here's fine. Private void load from start. And we should pass in the string array args. Okay, so let's do that here. All right, now we have this method. What we're going to say is directory info dir equals new, and then we can pass in args. And this is where, I don't know, I'm getting a little, let's call it lazy, but really it's just a matter of we're looking for positional items. So I'm looking for item at position 1, which is the second argument. Remember I looked for greater than 1. We're looking for the second argument. And then we can say is load images and pass in that dir. So if we launch this application with arguments on the command line, and the second one is going to be what we're looking for, and that's based upon how this thing loads, that's going to call the, so we got the main window calls a load from start, the load start finds the right directory and calls load images. Now, there'll be another one for right click, but this for right now gives us what we need for launching our application and displaying images on this screen. Next up, let's add in our right click context menu. And yes, this is a context menu, so we can come right below window at the end of that window before grid. We're going to say window dot context menu. And in this context menu, we're going to add a context menu. Yes, it's kind of verbose. But inside of here, I'm trying to keep these two windows open at the same time. You can pop this out into its own window, which is helpful. I really do like that. Actually, it's something I lobbied for a while. But I'm trying to keep these in the same window. Okay, menu item, header equals load directory. And we'll put the ellipsis afterwards. And we're going to put a click event on this. And let's say new click event handler. And I'm going to change that, say load directory _ click. So it's going to change the code. It probably put that handler in here. Let's look and see. Yes, it did. So there we go. So now it's menu item _ load directory _ click. So that's our event. And then I want to have this to be self-closing. And I want to have one more. Menu item header equals exit. And the click event equals, let's just name it ourselves, menu item _ exit _ click. Let's follow that same pattern. So let's go to the code, which we don't have code for this. So let's copy this and paste. That's one of the nice things of letting it do it itself. Private void, and we're going to say object sender and routed event args e to follow the same pattern. Again, you could have created yourself and renamed it like we did the previous one, but there we go. So now we have a context menu. So a context menu is we launch this application. In fact, we can launch this now, and it should be that it launches just fine. We can right-click anywhere on the screen and get a context menu. So now we have exit, we have load directory that do nothing, but these are the two items we have in our list. We can just click on one and fire that specific event. So that gives us what we need to then put things in these event calls. So let's wire these up. The first one we'll do is the easiest one. Menu item exit click. So when you click exit, close. So now if we were to run this, just to test it, we right click and say exit, the application closes. Cool. Simple, easy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wire up this one, which is the load directory. This is a bit more complicated. In fact, we're going to use the open file dialog. The open file dialog, which by the way, at the very top, we now have the using statement for, or using directive for Microsoft.win32. So open file dialog, and we're going to say, let's call it DLG for dialog equals new. And then we're going to say dialog.filter equals images. And then we're going to pipe in here star.png, star with no spaces, star.jpg, star.jpeg, star.bmp, and star.gif. So these are all separated by semicolons, and there's no spaces in here. We use the pipe here, so we can, this is what the user will see. It's like images, and it will show which images. And that gives us our filter so that we're not going to see all the files in a directory. We're just going to see the files that would be loaded if they are going to pass this list. Okay. Now I didn't put JPEG in here. I just put JPG. I think it's probably fine to drop this off. So this is one of those things where if you're going to use it, then use it. If you're not going to use it, then take it off. You don't have to support bitmaps or GIFs or whatever. I'm just going to load the ones that matter to me. So let's create a nullable Boolean that is result equals dialog.showDialog. So showDialog returns back a nullable Boolean that is going to return a good result, or an okay or a not okay. So this is going to show this open file dialog with the filters for our images. In fact, we can launch it right now. It's always good to take it step by step. So we can right click, load directory. Notice we now have as images and parentheses. It shows us which image types it allows, and there's no option for star.star. It's just which ones are image files. So if I went to a different folder, then like desktop, you don't see any images. Even though there's things on my desktop, they're just not images. They're PowerPoints, they're text files and other things. But if I go to my sample pictures, you can see that, yes, I have pictures. Now, double clicking on one doesn't do anything because we've stopped at the show result. So now let's process this by saying if result equals true. So it can't be true if it's null or if it's false. So only if it's true, where we have a result, we're going to say string folder path, actually nullable string, folder path equals path.get directory name for dialog.file name. So I'm using the file picker. So you're going to pick one file on the list, and we're going to get the directory off of that. Instead of doing a directory picker, we're going to use a file picker. I found that easier. I believe it's because there's a problem with the folder picker, or it was a little funky. So this just works. That way you select one of the images, doesn't matter which image you select, but then it will open up that directory. So if folder path is null, then return. So, hey, if you got a problem with the folder path not existing, then return. Otherwise, what we're going to say is directory info dir equals new folder path. Remember the first time we did this, which is up here, we passed in the args. This time we're passing in the args at position 1. So the second arg. This time we're passing in the folder path. But either way, we get the directory info, which then we can say we want to call that method, which was what? It was load images. So load images passing in the directory. That's it. So now we're going to load the images based upon our right-click selection. Let's try this again. So now we can say load directory, select the first image, and there we go. So now we have an image loading to our screen, and it does resize like we expected because it's taking up the full screen, but we never tell it to not keep the ratio. By default, it keeps the ratio. So if it's 16:9, which this is, then it's going to say, okay, if we have more width than we need, then the height is the limiting factor. If we have more height than we need, the width is the limiting factor, and so on. So this now allows us to get closer, right? We've got the image that's almost full screen, have this white border around it. That's not great. We can turn that border off, remember, but we're not quite there yet because we still have to figure out a few things, including move next and move previous. But we also have to figure out things like maximize by double clicking and escaping and all the rest. Let's start with our arrow keys. And to do that, we go back to our XAML, back to our window. And in here, in the window itself, we can say key down. This is an event. We create an event handler for it. So let's just say create new event handler. This should be the window underscore key down is fine. By doing that, it actually creates for us at the bottom here the event for us. Now we can shorten this. We don't need to have the window or system.windows.input. We can just say key event args and add that using statement at the top. So there we go. So now that's at the top. Now we can work with the key down. We can do a switch or a switch on e.key. Which key is it that we're switching on? So this is going to capture the keyboard inputs, and e.key will tell us which input was associated with this event. So case, and we're going to say, let's start with key.left. Because that's pretty easy to do. That is going to be move previous image and break. I spell it right. And then we're going to do the same thing as before, case key.right. So it's the right arrow. And we're going to say move next image and break. And then for anything else, we're going to say default is break. Always make sure you cover every particular case, which means having a default in almost every case. So just this right here will allow us now, if we open up our directory, we launch it, and now if I hit the right arrow key, it moves to the next image. I move my left arrow key, it moves to the previous image. Move my left arrow key again, it moves the image at the end. I move to the right again, it goes back to the beginning, and so on. So now we're getting closer. We're getting closer to what we want for our application, but we're not quite there yet. I do want to have one more key in place. So let's come down here, and this will be a bit trickier. So case key.escape. So this is it's always good to have the break at the end before you start typing, because that way you don't forget about it. So this one's going to do different things depending on the current state of the window. So if window state equals Windows state dot maximized. So if you're maximized, then window state equals Windows state dot normal. So if it's a full screen, we hit escape. It's going to go down to the not full screen version. And otherwise, so else, we're going to close. So it moved the break in for that. So what it's going to do is, if it's full screen, it's going to go back to regular screen. If it's regular screen, it's going to close the application. So let's just see this in action. You don't have to load an image here. If I maximize this and I hit escape, it goes back to regular screen. If I hit escape again, it closes the application. So that's the thing we want to see happen here is you want to see that we have that escape key allows us to just get out of things quickly without having to go to our mouse. So we can just escape quickly. And I have contemplated this, if you wanted to, you could make escape always just close the application. And what that will allow for is right now I minimize the window when I'm done with the image and I want to start getting into the video. But I have considered, what if I just hit the escape key instead and it did the same thing? So it would just stop the application entirely, just make it go away. That could work. The only thing is for me is sometimes, not often, but sometimes I want that image back later, where I would click on the icon again, it would bring it back to full screen on the screen. In that case, then I don't want to make it go away like that, but that could be a use case. So it could be that you want to just simplify this just to say close when you hit escape. But there we go. So that takes care of the keyboard, and you have to have the window active. So the window has to be active in order for these keys to work. This is not going to listen for keys when the window is not the active application currently running. So if you are currently in Visual Studio, but you want to hit the escape key and expect it to work on the running application, that's not what's going to happen. You have to make sure the application is what's got the foreground access. Okay, so now we need a couple of more events. We need the mouse down event. And let's just create the event handler for that. And then one more is mouse double click event. So two different events for two different purposes. Mouse down is going to allow us to drag the window around. And then mouse double click will allow us to expand to full screen immediately. So let's go back to our code here. And it looks like down here, mouse down is the first one. So we're going to say if e.changed button equals mouse button dot left. So we're saying only if you're using the left click, because mouse down doesn't necessarily mean mouse left down. It could mean mouse right down, which is our right click menu. We don't want that to be intercepted. But this, instead, we're going to say drag move. So this allows us, this is a built-in window.drag move, allows the window to be dragged by a mouse with its left button down over an exposed area of the Windows client area. So let's just see it as an action. To do that, I click anywhere in the middle of the screen here, I click and hold, and I can drag it around. I'm done, and it's done. I can right click still, get that, but if I left click and drag, I can move the window around, which allows us then to go back to our window now that we're ready and say border thickness is 0, and also the window style is going to be none. So now when we run this again, we don't have a border anymore. It's gone. Like just the edge here is all we get. And if we load images and double click them, well, actually I can't double click. So I can't maximize right now. We'll get to that in a minute. But now we can see our window. We can resize, we can move around however we want. And when we're done, we can either right click and say exit or hit escape. So we're getting closer, but let's go ahead and deal with the double click. Okay, so if Windows state equals Windows state dot maximized, and actually it should be double equals, not a assignment equals, it's comparison equals. So Windows state equals Windows state dot normal. So if it's maximized, you double click on it, it's going to go back to normal size. But if it's normal sized, so else, then we're going to say Windows state equals window state dot maximized. So this will allow us now, when it's regular, we double click on it, it's full screen. We double click again, it goes back to regular screen. We can load our directory and see this in action. Double click, there it goes, full screen. By the way, we can move left and right how we want. We can double click, go back to regular screen, back to full screen, back to regular screen. If I hit escape, the application closes. So now we have an application that is working the way I want it to for this utility. We have something that's very simple to run. We just need this executable, which I'm going to do a 10-minute training video later on deployment of this. We'll go ahead and package this up as an exe and show you how to put it in the context menu. It's a little bit of is 2 registry entries. But this allows you now to have a utility that can do what I wanted it to do. And again, this is very much I am the consumer here. This is not a for everybody utility. You may want to create a utility that is more for you. That's cool. So go ahead and create something that works for you, for your situation, tweak it a little bit. But these are the kind of things that make your life better. So this for me saves me so much time. It saves me so much, headache and having to, have videos have to be redone because they're not right, because that image is not right. Or what I was doing was in post-production, I would put that slide over top of the screen. But that takes extra step and extra time in post-production. Well, I can save that by doing this during the recording. And so this saves me a little bit of time every video I do, and I do a dozen plus videos a week sometimes a lot more than that. So that saved me a lot of time over the course of a week, over the course of a month. Over the course of the years I've used this utility, it has saved me hundreds of hours. So this little thing has saved me a lot of time, made me more efficient. I got a number of these utilities that do different things that just automate my life. But also, this is a great way to show off some of your skills. This is a little bit of WPF. There's a little bit of link in here. There's a little bit of dialogues and opening files and working with files, etc. So there's some really cool little things you can do with this. And if you noticed, I don't know if you caught this or not, but in our folder, when I right-click and say show more options, we have a simple image viewer. Notice up here, I also have clean and zip. That's another utility that I wrote that allows me to package up the source code much, much easier. You see, let's go back to our simple image viewer. And if we right-click and say open in File Explorer, you'll see that in our solution or our project file, we have this bin folder and the OBJ folder. And if I'm using source control, we also have Git involved with the Git folder and all the rest. Well, when I send this to you, I send you a link for it, but you don't want to have all this stuff. Now, this is going to be a smaller project because it's WPF, but it's 776 kilobytes, right? When I send it to you, and there's a link in the description, it will be much less than that. It might be a few kilobytes because of the fact that I will clean and zip this. And what happens is I'll start this level, the solution. I will say clean and zip, and it's done. It's already done. In fact, let me drag this onto the same folder, and you can see that this one is 4 kilobytes. So 4 kilobytes, not the whatever it was, almost 800 kilobytes. So we open up this zip file. We can see a similar structure with the solution file. There's no bin or OBJ files. So that process, it cleaned out the extra stuff. Now, I'll probably do a video later on on the clean and zip process as well. But these type of utilities save me time. And that's first and foremost the important bit, right? So when I'm done with this video, I want to just say, hey, let's grab that source code and send it to you and have it cleaned up with delete the bin OBJ folder and delete any Git folders and delete anything that's sensitive information that might be something I don't want to give you, like secret keys or something like that. So all these things in total, I can do with one application. And again, it saves me time. But then we go to an employer and say, well, here are the things I built. it's not just I built a sample app, but you can say I save myself an hour a week using this utility here that I built. I save myself 5 minutes a day using this utility that I built, and show off real things that are actually working, that actually do a useful job, even if it's just useful for you. That can be really helpful for actually showing off that, first of all, you're working on being more efficient. Second of all, you can work on things that may be outside your normal for C#, but still have skill in there. And third of all, that you're going to be an asset to the team because you're going to make tools that make the team more efficient as well. So these little apps and utilities are really good. They're not something I'll put in the App Store ever, but they are things that can help out myself at least, if not others. And it's a great way to show off what you can do. Okay, so that's a simple image viewer. That's how it works. Like I said, I'll do a 10-minute training video later where we package this up as an exe and put in the registry and all the rest, so you can use that in your right-click menu, etc. So we'll do that later. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you want that source code, it's linked down in the description. And as always, I am Tim Corey.